So this is really just going to be the visual accompaniment to what you guys are doing hands-on. I just figured it'd be best to start with a picture before we start letting you guys go out. So training, like I said, those first 3 years of a fruit tree's life is essential, especially when you're growing a peach, an apple, or a pear. And this is why. They both have very distinct shapes they want to be in to give you the most amount of fruit that you can get out of the tree. So those first 3 years of pruning are called training. Now, this picture here, I guess I'm going to step out of range. This picture here is the central leader form. This is used for apples and pears, as opposed to peaches, which are an open basket. So they're quite literally the opposite of each other. So figs, again, are super plant. You can prune them really depending on your shape. So if you have a vigorous fig and it's starting to take over something, you can cut it back. It'll be fine. Figs don't need a specific shape, but our apples, pears, and peaches do. So this is just a old graphic of what that would look like. So our central leader is exactly what it sounds like. You want that main leader, and your scaffolding will just come off on the side. And this is how to do it correctly and incorrectly. And Karen, if you would like to hop in.
Yeah, sure. So a couple things. We'll go back to the fig. I think a couple of you have figs on your tables. First thing you have to decide. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. First thing you have to decide when you buy a fig tree, maybe you inherit a fig tree. Do you want it to grow in a tree shape or a shrub shape? Some figs prefer, they'll naturally grow to tree. Most will naturally grow to shrub. There's pros and cons to each. I think the tree shape looks better aesthetically, but the shrub will give you a little bit more protection against the cold, and it will give you a little bit more fruit. So your choice. Again, both of these, I think all of the figs I brought, you have to decide. I brought the ones that I did. Maybe we'll train it to a tree shape because these are all actually about to go dormant. They go into my airplane hangar or garage for the winter. So I actually always cut them down this time of year right to about 18. I wait for the leaves to fall off. It's okay, we're a little early, but it won't hurt these figs. So the ones that have figs, your first job would be to prune off the suckers or the branches and then bring it down to about 18, 20 inches because that's going to.
Just a stick.
Yeah, just a stem. It's all gonna be a stem.
And suckers can either be your new fruiting wood coming out from the very bottom, like below our graft union, especially if it's below the graft union, or it can be literally just little shoots coming up from the ground. Those are your suckers. It's actually really common with certain peach tree rootstocks.
Yes, which is also, to your point, to the case with the apples and the pears. Figs actually don't have any graft unions. They're not grafted. These are all just straight up cuttings. You don't need to graft a fig. They grow beautifully here. They love it here. Mike Parker is one of my favorite professors here at NC State. My class, I was the class of the COVID class 2022. I guess that's what they call us. He actually presented to us. It was via Zoom, but I love that guy. So when I talk my portion, I'm always trying to channel Mike. But what Mike says here in North Carolina, you know, apples and pears are a lot of work. If you can't grow an apple or pear, grow a fig. If you can't grow a fig, take up woodworking. it's that easy. Like figs are so easy. Yeah, they're great. We'll talk a little bit about the blueberries. I have a lot of apple trees, pear trees. It's just too early. I prune those Valentine's Day, so that's why you're not getting to do that hands-on today. I tried to do things that.
But we will in February.
Oh, we will in February.
Yes, you are all invited.
Yes. And if you're interested, I did bring one of the pear trees that I grafted. This is a moon glow. Is this a moon glow or an Asian? I think it's a moon glow. Yeah, this is a moon glow. It was grafted onto the Old Home by Farmingdale 97. So it's a dwarfing. It's a semi-dwarf technically, but a very sturdy. And I brought this one for a couple of reasons. It's going to be a challenge when I prune it back once it drops all of its leaves because it's a pear and I want it to be a central leader. So I'm either going to have to lose some major branches or do some staking.
So the key thing to remember, if you don't remember all these technical terms we're talking about, this is physics based, okay? If you have a central leader, if you look at this incorrect row here, why is it not working? Because they pruned it to be top heavy. That's why it didn't work. And if you do it badly enough, your trunk can split, especially as your tree gets older. So you know, regardless of your horticultural knowledge, if you know physics, basic physics, you should be able to prune correctly. So if we're looking at the top here, which is done right, we have our central leader, but you can see from the way the cuts are, the weight is evenly distributed. Now, this is even more important with your open basket shape. But again, it's all physics-based.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mike Parker, we have another video by him. These are the only two. This and the other one were the only ones I could find of him. But before we look at the pictures of that open basket shape for peach tree pruning, he is going to give us an explanation on it.
Oh.
This is much shorter.
When pruning young trees, we're going to use a pair of hand pruners. I prefer to use a pair of what we call bypass pruners, where they have a hook and a blade, and when the cut is made, the blade bypasses the hook. These are two different styles that we use. Just make sure that when you prune your young trees that you're using a pair of sharp pruners that make a clean cut. Once our tree is planted, we need to start the pruning process. Peach trees historically have been pruned to an open center training system, and that's what we'll talk about today. When we start pruning our tree, we'd like our first branches to start approximately 18 to 24 inches above the soil line. Many times I'll use my knee and say, I would like my primary scaffolds to be in this area here. Since the center of this tree will be open, we identify our first scaffolds, 3 to 5 scaffold branches, or major branches, what we call them. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 branches that I will use to be my primary scaffolds.
Notice the angles that they're
At that point, I will cut the remainder of the tree, top of the tree out. We cut the tree out with a bevel cut.
It can handle it, I promise.
This one, we still have 5 scaffold branches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I would prefer to have 3 rather than 5, and here I'll cut out 1 more to come with 4 scaffold branches. At this point in time, I will head or cut the tips off each of these branches, approximately a quarter of those branches. When we make a heading cut like this, we stiffen the branch. We also encourage lateral branching behind that. In many cases, a peach tree will come as an on-branch shoot, or what we call a whip. The way to prune this tree is to identify where our scaffold branches will be required in this area here. Then we go up approximately 4 to 6 inches above where those required scaffolds are and cut the tree off. The reason that we go 4 to 6 inches above where those required scaffolds are is that the top 3 or 4 shoots that will grow this spring will be very upright, will be unsuitable to be used as scaffold branches. Those scaffold branches will either be broken off the top and left there, is what we call a trashy center tree, or they will be pruned out the following dormant season. When starting young trees off, the reason that we cut 4 to 6 inches above where we like our desired branches is because the resulting growth from a heading cut, the top 3 or 4 buds are very vigorous and upright. As we move farther away from where the heading cut would have been in the previous season, the branches get a much wider crotch angle. Crotch angles are essential for having our major scaffolds because they'll be much stronger. We would look at the top of this tree where a heading cut was made here. We look at the top 1, 2, 3 branches are very vigorous. Those would be ones that we would remove the next season. If not, if we look at these top 3 branches, when any force is put on there, it splits the entire tree, losing the productivity of the tree. So what we would do is we would come back in after a heading cut in the dormant season. We get the top 3 or 4 buds to be very vigorous. Those would be removed at a later date. Not only the tree, so we would still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scaffold branches. We may move the bottom one. If we look down from the top, we have 4 scaffold branches going off in 4 different directions. For more information on training and pruning fruit trees, you can refer to this publication published by the North Carolina Cooperative Extension Service.
You'll have it.
It can be found on the website at the bottom of this screen.
So I'm sharing with you the PDF version, and if I'm not mistaken, from a ornamental perspective, there is another publication on just ornamental pruning and grafting. So, like I said, physics, and I'm sorry you all had to watch so much of that tree get cut, but plants are hardy, they can handle it. So pruning, this is that open basket shape. This I pulled from someone else's, from another lecture that I do, so that's not my drawing. And you can't really see it in this picture, but physics with that open basket shape. Now, of course, you're not going to have perfect 90, 90, 90, 90 degree angles, but that's generally the type of distribution you're looking at with your main scaffolding. So the sciencey reason, the chemical reason that we do that open basket shape and we talk about those upright branches is that the growth hormone inside of plants is known as auxin. So the reason we prune is that it actually stimulates the production of auxin. So when you're training, like naturally, you know, it doesn't matter what it is, naturally you're going to have vigorous upright growth toward the sun. But when you cut it, you're stimulating that auxin, that growth hormone inside the plant, which is what helps stimulate that lateral growth. So that's just a little aside. Genetics and chemistry would be far too much to talk about today, but once you've done your training, and this is more general pruning, you will prune for a variety of reasons. So when you're pruning in general, after you have your shape, you're removing crossing branches. You don't want, especially you got fruit, you don't want everything tangled, especially when it comes to thinning. You want to remove branches with bad angles, which kind of comes into that tangling or anything you have growing upright, because even if you have this 7-foot diameter open basket peach tree, you're still going to get on the inside of those scaffolds, those upshoots, that fruiting wood that's going to go up. So you're still looking for bad angles or things that cross, no matter how old it is. We want to get rid of our suckers and shoots. And just from a personal comfort level, don't have fruiting wood that's like below the knee, because you don't want to be doing what I did and have to crouch down like this. So from a personal comfort level, anything that's hanging really low, it can produce fruit. So I would get rid of those as well if I were you. And specifically for peaches, we're looking for 45-degree angles. All right. Outside of our bad angles and our crosses, we're looking for 45-degree angles. And once you get your primary for scaffolding, as you can see in this picture, we can start looking at our secondary and tertiary scaffolding, which just means we're looking for things growing up and out. That's that 45-degree angle, that outward and upward. We don't want anything going straight up, because then we can talk about light proliferation. We can talk about air drainage and all these other things. So up and out, very distinct shape. Here are our canes, all those little canes of our blackberries. So they also get severe treatment because fruit is only produced on the new canes. So you cannot keep any of these canes season after season. That's why you have to do crepe murder on it every time it's time to prune, because that new fruiting wood is what your berries are going to come off of. Specifically, we want thin the canes to about 6 canes per plant. And after harvest, remove all the fruiting canes and burn them or throw them away. Do not damage the new shoots. It should be easy to tell what's new and what's old.
One thing, yeah, worth mentioning, couple things. So
Yeah.
I know you put, so there was a slide with all the diseases that blackberry get. The ones that we're most at risk for here is actually rust disease. And that I don't keep any of my blackberries here. They're all at my property in Virginia. And that's because my house here has a berm, a wild berm. It's an open space and wild blackberries grow there. And starting in June, it'll be covered with orange, right? It's just bright orange. I'm like, what is, oh, it's rust disease. I don't want that to contaminate mine. So keep your eye out for rust disease. It is a fungal disease. Now I should also mention there's a brand new type of blackberry. So there were your traditional thorn blackberries, and the number of the universities are putting out upright blackberries that don't require trellising. They're beautiful, they're fabulous. There are all now also thornless upright blackberries. So things like Apache, Navajo, Ouachita, Vaughn, the one that came out of your NC State is Vaughn, VON, I think after one of the professors, all great. They can be grown in pots, they grow upright, and they are, you know, not gonna stick you to death. Furthermore, there's a new one out of the University of Arkansas. Blackberries are on a 2-year cycle. There's primocanes and there's floricanes. And to Deanna's point, you always have to cut away the floricanes. If that bramble or that branch has produced fruit, it needs to be cut to the ground. It will not give you any more fruit. You don't want to be cutting away your new green fruits that are only showing green vegetative growth, but no flowers yet, because that's what's going to give you fruit next year. Those you want to prune back, but you don't want to cut to the ground, but you just throw away all your fruits. University of Arkansas released, and I think it's just now off patent, this amazing, the first ever of its kind, It's called Primark Freedom, Primark Traveler, Primark 45. It is a blackberry that fruits on first year wood. So you actually get 2 harvests every year. And I have a ton of those and they're amazing. And you get a big harvest in May, June. And I am still literally, because we're having this crazy Indian fall, I'm eating blackberries now. I'm getting them off of there. They'll, as soon as we get a cold, they'll be gone. But yeah, Primark Freedom. Yeah.
And I'm gonna have you touch
Oh,
on this. 'cause
right, okay. So we'll go over this. Yeah, it's always better to see this up front and, up close and personal, to really learn what we're saying. But when so we'll talk more about dwarfing rootstocks and when you're going to start seeing these types of spurs, but you just want to be mindful when you're pruning your apple and your pear trees that you're not cutting off your fruiting spurs. And you need to know what a spur looks like and identify it. So you're not, again, it's not laying on the ground, right? Cut the branches, not the spurs. They save the spur. So what the spurs look like are these tiny little stubby, this one's on an Asian pear, and that one's on one of my apple trees. They're just stubby little growths, just like this, with little concentric circles around them. And you want to preserve those at all costs. So again, you get a full harvest the next year.
This is why fruit trees are complicated and people should know what they're getting into when they want to buy one from the farmer's market. So thinning. So this is another common question. Now, if someone has a peach tree that is of age, but they have tiny peaches, which we call buttons, this is usually the reason why. It's because they don't thin. Why are all your fruits tiny? You're not thinning. So the benefits of thinning, physics. Of course, if you have especially a really low hanging branch and you have like 10 pounds of fruit on it, it's gonna fall and you're gonna have that monolinea I told you about, and it's just a whole mess. The second thing, and this is the reason why people need to do this, is that your fruit will grow to true size, how they look on the tag. And of course, with airflow and light proliferation, it decreases disease prevalence because all your little peaches or apples or whatever are not squished together. So what that looks like in a practical sense is for your apples, and correct me if I'm wrong on this one, you're going to have 1 fruit per 6 inches of fruiting wood. On average, like you're going to have something like this. This is a picture I took. You're going to have all these blooms that you see right here. See how close they are? No, we don't like that. For peaches, you want 1 fruit per 4 inches or 3 fruit per foot. So when you have your big old branch, you just let it bloom and let it be pretty because peach flowers are gorgeous. But when you get that green fruit, when you think about the whole tree, on average, you are going to be pulling about 70% of the blooms. You can do this when they're in the blooming stage or when you have your green fruit at the start of your fruit set, but you're going to have about 70% of what's on there on the ground so that everything can grow true to size and you don't have the little buttons that we're constantly getting called about.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, the only absolutely right. The only comment I have there is I always wait until my fruit is about 1 inch wide to thin the fruit. And I would walk out on my orchard with buckets and tubs and buckets of fruit. And my husband's just looking at me, what are you doing? There's your whole harvest. I'm like, no, it's gonna work out. It's gonna work out. Now he understands. But my peaches this year, I pruned to 1 every 6 inches,
Yeah.
and they were still small. So I went to the gentleman at the farmer's market next to me. I've been at the farmer's market, and my peaches were beautiful, but they're contender, a little on the smaller side, and his were huge. I said, what do you do for thinning? How much space are you leaving? And he's like, he obviously wasn't one who does the thinning, he does the selling. So he made a phone call back. And this is a family he's like the 4th generation peach farmer in this family, 10 inches. They were leaving 10 whole inches, but he's like this, yeah, between the fruit to get them that large. Yeah. 6 will work great and you'll get a perfect, medium-sized fruit, but if you want them as large as possible, maybe.
and it depends also what you're working with too. Like for
Yes.
example, July Prince, which was what we had in the experiment orchard. Part of this had to do with rain, which can happen with blueberries and fruit cracking, tomatoes as well. Our July Prince were like this big. Wow. That first summer I was there, and then we had rain the second year and it was ruined. We couldn't actually, the disease prevalence bogged it down, but it depends on what you're working with. Again, you might have something that's naturally smaller. You know what, I will talk about fruit cracking for a second because that is important. It's more of a blueberry, grape, tomato. I don't think blackberries or caneberries fruit crack. Do they? They do. All right, our small fruits, they fruit crack. Now, what this is when we have, like we had this summer, we're recording a crap ton of rain. And then you have a dry period. Remember, what are cells? Water, right? So what happens when you get a bunch of rain? And what happens if it happens too quickly for the fruit to grow? They crack. So if you see this actually happened with a few of the tomatoes I was growing, and even though they were on a porch, some of my tomatoes, my cherry tomatoes, actually did crack. And that is super common with your small fruit, especially when, you know, fluctuations in temperature can cause that red fruit on that blackberry. But those fluctuations can also affect the amount of water inside your small berries, so that can cause cracking or shriveling. And the other thing about this is we're not really going to touch on this because the many asides, herbicides, insecticides, pesticides, whatever have you, they are a mixed bag, and you probably need to have your pesticide license for that. A lot of them. And the other reason we're not going to talk about those is that if it rains, it doesn't matter, especially when you're working with your pesticides. A lot of them are water soluble. So that's the other reason why you need to really take care with your diseases, because whatever you're using will absolutely wash off in the rain. And it's a good thing too, because you don't want to be eating that. So, you know, that's that trade-off. You have something that's water soluble, but you know, if you don't happen to wash it, it's safe to consume. And the other thing is that most pesticide applicator license herbicides or pesticides have re-entry time. Now, what that means is that you cannot step on the property for X amount of days after something is sprayed. For example, the mixture of pesticides and herbicides that was used by our technician for our monolinea and peach tree borer had a 1 week reentry time. So no one could step onto the orchard until a week later. So that's the other reason we're really not going to talk about those either, because if you guys get a hold of something like that, I'm going to have a lot of questions.